Mm. Hello again, Joachim Stroh from Brooklyn, New York. We're here with Christina, Jim, and Gary to talk about social ledger. What else? Today's topic, we'll talk about genes, memes, epigenetics, and that strange Google video, right? You can find the link. I'll post that in the recording too. All right. I don't know. We can start with a quick update on the social ledger, maybe. Any news from your end, Jim, Christina, Gary? Muddling along.
Muddling along. We're staffing. We're doing some advertising to try to bring in more developers. We have one developer that's supposed to start in June, we're making use of GraphQL in supporting our guides system for issues in GitHub as part of the bounty system. It's pretty cool. We're using GraphQL we're trying to figure out how to hook up MySQL database and as the next step, and looking for coaching.
Good. Small steps. I mean, that's what I feel about this GraphQL is. It's a lot of small steps. The good thing is you can break it down into these small steps, right? So you get one thing, you implement one thing, and you move on to the next, right? And so everything works and fits together, gets bigger and bigger over time. That's a fascinating aspect.
Yeah. And there's not too many hurdles we have to pass, before we can expose development to non-programmers, which is our objective initially.
That's right.
I've been working a little bit on a bot and some automation for us, but I'm under the weather right now, and I don't know how productive I'm going to be for a while. Christina helped with the some documentation for starting out our bot project, and that was a great help. But again, I'm not going to be much help until I get my health under control.
I'll get a hold of Makis too, because we can keep going on sort of thinking through the initial stuff while you're recovering. Get better soon.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that this whole mememics plays in strongly to the onboarding and the structure of the social ledger, in that if you consider, purposeful memes that you're spreading, okay, a bot can help do that. And the other thing that I was thinking also is we can do more reactively, rather than people having to declare and explicitly the structure of the social ledger. We can discover it, okay, from their interactions. And that's very powerful because it creates an initial skeleton that users can build on, rather than them having to build the skeleton from scratch.
Right. Let's talk about that, and especially interaction and the skeleton stuff, Jim, because it relates so much to this strange Google video that I recommend everyone to watch. That was leaked from Google and is now available on The Verge. There's a link here later in the chat place. Gary, one more thing. There's a folk guy called Joe Mariello. He's also very much into bot programming. I know him from another project with his knowledge expedition, and he wants to contact you. I told him to reach out to you. So at some point, you will see him pinging you. I already added him to the Social Ledger lab, so you'll probably see him running around there somewhere.
Great.
But I think he's a good programmer, and he's done some bot stuff recently, and I told him you're also very much into creating these bots. Okay, Christina. You gotta
before
go?
we get before we get into the video, I just wanted to say that the pseudo power, I think we need soon. I don't know where that is in development or how that is linked to the social ledger, but the network map is looking at getting a donate button to create donations that go to that project. And we have an opportunity here to think through how a project, do we give 2%, 5%, 20% back to the collective, how do we do financial reporting? How do we make decisions to spend money? And I think that the pseudopower would be super useful there to record who has that decision-making power and money spending power.
Right. Yeah.
And reporting, financial reporting obligation and that sort of thing. So.
Yeah, and that gets us into a discussion about more dedicated roles within the collective, right? I'm not saying permanent roles or employees, but sort of roles where there, basically, where we can rely on you, we can reach you, something happens, you jump in. That's a challenge for us because
I suggest that people don't have fixed roles per se. The role is defined by the activities they are engaged in. Okay, so there's activity, and if we look at the 11 patterns of decentralized organizing. Okay, we have the power over here, which is the pseudo and delegation of authority and the pseudo, in essence, you have user managed authorizations, and then these patterns exist on every level of the organization. If we have a peer-to-peer arrangement, we apply these 11 patterns. If we have, in order to be part of a decentralized organization, and we follow it individually, these patterns. But the user-managed authorizations that we grant as an individual, that we grant as a team, or among some set of connections, in essence, define that pseudo capability generally. I don't know if that was helpful at all, Christina.
Well, if I jump in for a second, I mean, yes, we've identified these patterns, Jim. We've written about it a lot, and we know what these patterns are. I think we're pretty familiar with those. There's just a gap now that we have to bridge somewhere between the patterns and how we work together in a decentralized fashion and the pseudo activities we have to do, right? Be that in marketing, be that in human relations, be that in whatever. domain that we're putting together, and that talks so much about there's some kind of a structure, structure, I don't know, that you need to create to run such a thing. And we've seen from the very beginning that if you put too much structure into place, it's not going to work. If you put too little structure in place, then you have something else. Um, and and that bridge, to me is the question mark here, right? How do you bridge that to say, hey, there's a couple of people very much engaged. Yes, let's put them into the pseudo role. Yes, we can make sure that they perform in that role and are available, right? And it fits in the overall landscape we're putting together. It does fit, of course, especially if you look at it from a sociocratic perspective. But you still have to have that person, signed to something and be part of it outside the project engagement, right? That we're actively running in the collective. I know, Christina, that doesn't sound so positive. Right? You want to hear something? When can we get started with this stuff, right?
No, we're getting started. It's not like when we can get started. We're going to have a donate button on the map where people can give money to the map, and we're going to present the map in August at the Decentralized Web Conference, the summit for the Internet Archive. I'm also probably going down mid-June and doing a pre-summit workshop with 100 to 150 developers. So we need this. We need some sense, like even if it's just an agreement among the collective of how we spend money on this project can be a model for how other projects get started, get authorization, and get nurtured within the collective. And if I don't have support, I'm going to figure that out on myself, and I don't have experience doing this. I'm also going to talk to Tim Hewitt and probably one of the fellows at the School for Entrepreneurship at Mondragon to see what the minimal time might be, where you get some sort of you can use the co-op account to take in funds, and then you can do some sort of reporting. And I don't know what would be required, but we need to figure it out because this is going to happen.
Yeah, and our chain is embroiled in the same issue of how do we get authority in a decentralized operation, and what I'm suggesting basically is that we consent to some consent process, and I guess whoever are in the meeting are the right people, and we get consent among a circle. And then we determine who the stakeholder circles are. And we say, do we have a strong connection to those circles? Do we have the authority to grant consent from that other circle? Like here, I guess Joachim and I are a quorum to give consent of the technical team. Okay, if the technical team was a stakeholder in the decision. If marketing is a stakeholder, then we would seek consent from that group. And that consent, maybe one person can give that consent. Maybe they need to raise it at the meeting and get consent around the circle. That's up to that team, how they delegate authority. The important thing is that we, for example, the principles and values group in our chain that I'm one of the guides in, needs to get consent from the executive committee, from the marketing team, from the branding team. and the membership. And we're doing some general polling of the membership, as well as connecting, linking to the stakeholder groups that that we have. And going back to the the pattern of how we make decisions, that's sort of a prerequisite to the rest of this. Now, we can, and here's the connections, and we can look at those, and we can, I don't know if this is the right time and place, but I would suggest that we return 10% a tithe back to the co-op of contributions. That would be my proposal.
Fiscal sponsorship in nonprofit world is usually 5 to 10%. So it makes sense to me.
5% is fine too. We can do 5%.
I would start with 10, and then if a project is really struggling, then we can.
It's a management fee, and 10% is not high.
So, okay, I mean, Christina, you need something now, right? I mean, you're in the middle of this project and you want support now. It's the good thing. The good news is we have something going there, and now it's a matter of maybe it's a matter of, okay, you need to say exactly what it is that you need right now in the moment, and then we need to find the people who support that. So don't look too much into, the pseudo thing is good if you already have the dedicated teams, as Jim laid it out, right, in the roles inside. But to me, maybe that's a barrier for you, because we don't have that structure, but you want to get stuff started now, right? Rather than having people to go through this, becoming, pseudo for something, saying, I'm already doing this, tomorrow we're going to go out and raise some funds here. I need support for A, B, and C to get this off the ground. And we have to then, this has to be more urgent, and then we have to have someone to jump into that role. And if that's a technical thing, we see who has the capacity, who has the understanding of that piece, and then we can do that for your project, right? If that's a marketing thing, we'll see what we have in marketing, That's more people, then we see what it is. And
yeah, marketing. I mean, Steve has already helped with the copy for the sidebar. I don't know. I mean, I really think it's the financial piece, and Laura flagged. We have to have some sort of reporting mechanism. Anyway, I didn't mean to derail the whole meme Google video conversation. So just wanted to let you know that that's going forward, and it's the project that the network map came before the idea for the collective, and if it becomes too problematic, we could just not segregate it out, and we can decide as the collective to support the map, because it's such, it's kind of the one thing that the collective is doing. The Social Ledger Lab has moved on and is still sort of associated, but it's not branded as the collective. But I think it's an opportunity to make a pathway for a decision-making process and a financial reporting process, so that other people feel comfortable going through and starting a project that is aligned with our mission. And going and getting funding for it, and then making some sort of 10%, fiscal sponsorship type of contribution.
Yes, yeah, I very much agree. This is a structural piece that we need to get in place. It's for the good of all, for your project and for the collective. Yeah.
Ideally, we if people had energy to do it, I would suggest using the prototype to organize it. I think that we will be able to use the data from that, and it will, it will help in the discovery of who's doing what and who needs authority to do what they're doing, and just would provide valuable data for us, and it may involve setting up the circles properly within the domains, so that they reflect the people who are doing the work, okay, as opposed to who we think should be doing the work.
Right. I mean, so to Jim's point, Christina, just, there's a critical path for your project, and just insist on, if we don't have that finance piece resolved, we can't run this thing. Not in the collective, right? So what are the alternatives, right? So it is a critical piece for the thing you're building, right? And we can say exactly what the pieces are, right? What is it? A process? Is it a tool that we need? Is it people who have to be in the role here? And then do it, right? I think it's a common issue. I see the same thing over in the School of the Possible with Dave Gray's stuff. They're starting with these labs and lots of different projects and ideas. And I mean, these labs and ideas, they contain the energy, right? That's where the passion is of the individuals who build this thing together, right? And it's just the supporting structure that has to come out of this, the connection between what you do in the project and the common needs you see across the projects. And growing that thing is a real challenge, right? Without getting into traditional structures. That's the thing always, right? You could start with traditional company formation and roles and employees, but that's not the track we are on, I think.
Yeah, and supporting the 11 patterns in the team that's doing this job, consciously applying them.
So
creates an organization that can be scaled and can be effective.
We initially looked at launching on Open Collective, and that didn't go through because of, I don't remember why. I think that having to have PayPal as well as Stripe didn't work, or I don't know. But it's that functionality. Like, what can we learn from Open Collective? That functionality allows you to peel off, have complete financial transparency for a project underneath as a subcollective of any collective that exists. And like Women Who Code use it to support like 70 different meetup groups all across the nation. And some of them have $4,000 a year budget. Some of them have $20,000 a year budget. There's, the Women Who Code parent collective has like $100,000 or plus $1,000 a year budget. And that they don't need to micromanage those. Like, what can we learn from them in this position?
Hmm. Is that worth to, sit down with them and talk about how they resolved it, how they're doing it, what's needed for us?
I don't know. I think Pia would say join Open Collective. That's why we're building this thing. I don't know.
Questions are always good. All right. That's the first half. Shall we move on to the second half? Sorry, Christina.
No, I didn't mean it to take that long. I'm sorry.
No, not a problem.
These are issues that, yes, we have to solve. And I don't think joining Open Collective is going to solve them all. We're sort of lose control as soon as we give up control to the Open Collective. Just a little bit of some of whatever concern me. For example, when we start using open money, what does Open Collective really buy us?
All right. So let me switch gear here and let's talk about the Google video. I hope you had a chance to watch this. If not, watch it after this. It's really interesting. Why do I think it's so interesting? They call it a visionary piece, a visionary piece for Google. It's not official, so that's something where they want to get some minds going inside the organization. And what I find fascinating is that they put this thing called the selfish ledger at the core of what Google is going to do in the future with all the data they're collecting, right? So named it a social ledger, has this little book form, right? And then they start comparing that to genetics and to epigenetics, right? There's this guy called Lamarck who came up with this idea of the epigenome, right? So unlike a genome, which changes from generation to generation to generation, so the epigenome is the idea that something changes within one single generation and is carried on to the next generation, right? So less biological, more physiological, or psychological, behavioral changes that are carried on to the next generation. And it seems like Google is latching completely onto this idea of this Lamarckian epigenome. And that to me is fascinating, that they put something like this at the core of their thinking, right? So of course it has drawn in a lot of criticism. You can see there's another video from the Verge guy. I encourage you to watch that, who sort of reflects upon this video. And it's kind of scary, it's kind of the thing that Google is doing with the data, what they can do with the data is scary. But the silver lining here for the social ledger, and I want to discriminate between, let's call our stuff the social ledger, and they call it whatever ledger. Selfish ledger is actually a good bad name for the Google guys. It's because it's very selfish. It's what they want, right? So it's of course the centralized organization with these stakeholders. They want to draw attention to something that makes more money, right? That's the whole idea. So very selfish. Perfect name for that, right? So I want to draw this distinction, right, between what we do on the social/human side with the data and the selfish/ big data that Google has access to. It's a good distinction. And there's actually someone called Nora Bateson, daughter of Gregory Bateson. She coined the term warm data versus cold data. I like the distinction a lot. So warm data in her notion is data that's bind to relationships. It's bind to other people you interact with. It's bind to a certain context you're interacting with, right? So that's the notion of warm data. Versus cold data is everything else. So where you don't have the context, where you just grab some data from all of the transactions you're doing out there, right? So you go and buy some stuff, you're going to take your mobile on the road, you weigh yourself on a scale. These are individual data points that Google already has access to, right? And they're trying to make a picture out of you from all these individual data sets. And to me, it's the name cold data is great because it's just islands of information, right? Islands of data that is in no way related, right? Because they don't know why you would have that data point, right? They're just doing it and they're just collecting it and they put it in a big database and then they're analyzing it, right? Versus, I think what we're trying to do with the social ledger is look at the warm data, meaning the relationships and the intentions that we have as a group. Why we're going together, why we're sitting in this project, why we're creating this context, right, to do something together. So it's very much a collective effort, right? This is about collective needs and that collective can be big or small, right? So small as a team size, 4 or 5 people, to large as a collective, right? But there's a need that the collective has, and that I distinguish from the Google stuff where they look at individuals and more so individual wants. So what are they guesstimating what the individual wants and then create that thing. I mean, there's this scary piece in this video where this machine recognizes, the algorithm recognizes, hey, this guy needs to lose some weight, right? So it goes out and says, okay, I don't have information about his current weight or his history of how his weight going up or down. So the machine decides to build a scale for this person, right? It says, it's a scale, you should weigh yourself, then I get the data, right? After I have that data, great, then I can suggest you other things, how do you change your diet, where I should go for a workout, and so forth. So that application that they're envisioning with this reddish R, I was shocked to see that R, looks like the R chain thingy a bit, but that magic application will then help the user, make the right decisions, quote unquote, right? Well, of course, obviously, with Google as the person who's raising these concerns. So it's about individual needs of the person versus the collective needs. I think that we're looking at. So Google says, what's good for you, in the sense of what we think is good for you, right? Okay, Jim.
Yeah. Wikipedia says epigenetic most often denotes changes in a chromosome that affect gene activity and expression. Okay, so it's a group change. It's a higher level change than the DNA, but it's not necessarily, it's not only a social thing, it's also a physiological thing. In the case of the life organism, in terms of the social organism, it analogously represents meme expression. I mean, in the sense that of Adolf Hitler's. You tell someone a lie often enough, and they'll believe it. The power of memes, but the memes are just part of a larger process that is represented by the system of memes that surround it within a context. And, what was missing to me in the Google video was the notion of context and decentralization, because without that decentralization, you're not going to, it's not going to evolve in a natural way. It's not going to mimic nature. It's creating a Frankenstein, It's
This is exactly it, Jim, right? They don't have access to that contextual data. And they think they don't need this access to the contextual data because it's going to be replaced by billions and trillions of data sets, right? If you move out to the Internet of Things where every single thing is going to be tracked about you that you do, all of your actions, right? They think they can put a picture together and then say, this is you. But what I find fascinating is that's the same notion that you had brought up around identity, Jim, right? So you are what you do. Then they're saying exactly the same thing, right? And they're trying to put your thing together, your skeleton, right? Who you are by collecting billions and billions of data points, right? And then inferring somewhere, with their algorithms to say, hey, this is Jim. Jim needs to lose some weight, right? Jim needs to learn how to use less tabs in his browser. Let's do something about it, right? And then they're going to suggest something because you're using one of these apps, right, where it pops up and says, hey, Jim, how about closing this tab now? I think it would be good for you. So, oh, you're muted.
So, yeah. This is why decentralizing the social ledger and having the privacy by default and sharing information within webs of trust and among people pseudo-anonymously or anonymously is so important.
Yes.
And essential to us being in control.
Yes.
Because we don't want to admit that we're trained like chickens by the media and everything else. Okay, all my neighbors here in Trump land, who I want to run our chain, are not bad people. Basically, I get shocked when they say a racist statement and they sort of apologize. But they're part of humanity that I don't want to exclude. I want to engage with.
Right.
But we're trained like chickens to be fragmented and to be fighting among each other, and we're balanced at the 50% point so that they can control some of everything.
That's exactly, trained like chickens, and that's the intention, I think, of Google, is to train you as a chicken, you as an individual, right? We have the data about you. We're going to help you, right? We don't care about the other people and your friendships and your neighbors around you, right? We want you to recognize you need to lose some weight and close more tabs. So here's what we use for. And that's exactly in the interest of the whole corporate world that's behind that, to cater now to your wants, right? And what you believe is maybe your need, right? But it's Google, recognizes it as your wants. And that goes even further. This is one word they use. I mean, that's really shocking. It's called behavioral sequencing. That's such a scary word. Behavior. Think about that. So it's extracting your patterns, right? What you do there day to day. And they figure out, okay, you're interested in this. You maybe want to weight some loss. You have this preference for certain types of foods. So now they're starting to cater to this. Okay, put it into a sequence to say, okay, in order to get there, here's A, B, and C. So a prescription for you, basically, right? That's what it is. And what we're doing with the social ledger is exactly the opposite. It's what John Calvin calls generative sequencing. Okay, to me that's like the counterpart to the behavioral sequences, was catered to individuals, right? To make get Google some more profit in the future to build the stuff that they think they need, versus the generative stuff where we say, hey, we're a group of people. What can you do to help us to be more effective, right? To realize our goals, our shared aspirations, right? And that's the stuff we're supporting as a collective, and that has by definition to be decentralized, as you said, Jim, right?
Down to the robot, okay, the RHO bot that is our personal assistant. okay, that uses the information for our good purpose, not for stockholders. But on the other hand, I'm not, I mean, the idea of Google as a replacement for the, the oil and the gold and the banking interests that control the media that train us today, maybe Google would do less harm. But it does scare me still. But I think that we're so controlled now, and people are in denial about it.
Yes.
Doing what we're doing with the social ledger, is a moral imperative.
That's yeah, exactly what I feel after seeing that video. It's like the imperative. I mean, we got to have some counterbalance to this kind of vision, right? And we're not big, but we have some ideas, right, to go about it.
We just need the developers.
Right.
And one thing about it is Google is not the worst of these the harvesters of personal information. Facebook is far more scary than Google.
Right,
Yes.
they've all been infiltrated. They all have some degree of corruption.
There's a lot of debate about that. They're both there under surveillance capitalism.
They're both there. That's right. The one thing I mentioned about, and to your point also, Gary, Google is not so good at creating social networks, right? They've tried it multiple times. I don't know if you've been on Google Plus. That's really in decline, and they never really got it right, like Facebook, and others. Or they had this Wave tool a while back, new immersive like tool that multi-purpose, Swiss Army knife tool that never took off. So they have real difficulties thinking socially, right? But you can understand that if you watch that video, where they're coming from, right? It's not about the collective, not at all. It's about the individual, right? And how do you get that person fragmented, isolated from everyone else, and then cater to his or her needs, right? And then you don't need the thinking that comes with bringing people together. So I think that's the one important thing from the video. The other thing, and I wanted to hear you again, Christina, on the selfish gene. The one thing they talked about is that the body replicates because it's just a shell for the gene, right? And the gene is the constant. That's the thinking there, and that's probably the mistake they're making to think that, right? But they're not taking that model and say, okay, we apply the same thing for the ledger that we're putting together, right? So at the core of the human is a ledger now that contains all of the activities and the behaviors and the stuff they've done in their life, and transport that to the sort of next generation, right? So I want to hear your point again about the notion of what Dawkins calls the selfish gene, the thing that supposedly is the one that wants to survive, not the human body around it. It's just a container and a carrier. What do they call it? Custodians of transient carriers. Another scary thing there. And tell us again what's missing here in that picture.
Well, if you think of the gene as encoding the information, of having information at all, it's almost like the cell is just in service to the gene. The human is just in service to the cells. It's like hierarchies flipped over, which is just as dysfunctional as a top-down hierarchy. It has the same structural problems. Genes will, like a gene expressed in one part of the cell will fold that particular protein that it's encoding for differently over here than it would if it was expressed over here. Like space matters, morphogenesis. So if you think about how spatially a protein develops and folds, the chemicals around it when it's expressed matter. And that's completely ignored by the selfish gene theory. And so it basically takes the gene completely out of context. And it's sort of the whole idea of a ledger for an individual rather than a social ledger that is about the context. Right?
Yes.
So if you pulled, I don't know, I find it hard to talk articulately about it because
I know, but what you
it's
just
so
said,
incredibly reductionist. And I think it really is very, very mechanistic, very, very limited and Cartesian view of a world where we actually need to move towards ecological thinking, Darwinian thinking in not nature red in tooth and claw, but in context.
Yeah, I think we're saying the same thing. I mean, any part of the ecosystem is tolerated if it's benign, and the echo chamber effect, is something that is where a mean takes on a life of its own. Okay, it no longer needs, it was catalyzed and then becomes cancerous. The and I think that's where that comes from. And I think what you're talking about in terms of spatially where things are determines how they're expressed is exactly. If you go to Wikipedia and you look up epigenetics, it'll describe how that process of of selecting what is where, so to speak, is epigenetical and really determines things. It's not what genes you have, it's how they are expressed that determines what you are. And that expression is epigenetical, not genetics.
The point that I was making is more like if you go to Wikipedia, it'll tell you a set of things and give you a lens onto epigenetics. If you go to the OED site, the Oxford English Dictionary, you get a different definition that's using different words. Like it depends on where it's expressed. Like the community that makes it, like if you put R-chain or holochain into a different community than the ones they're growing out of and said, here's a start, build on this, it would turn into something completely different.
Right. I mean,
where it grew.
I'm only saying that because that's completely consistent with, all the advances in epigenetics that I've been following for the last 20 years in terms of, not that it's complete, just that it happens. Okay, just that this is a process that goes on. And there is control over the expression of genes that is passed from parent to child, as well as the DNA. That's determined. Determined by, by their experience in a lifetime, so to speak.
Right.
Um,
Right.
I think that from the conversation with Douglas Rushkoff and Fernanda and Kenny and Ollie and Philip the other day, the idea that metaphors can be dangerous, and depending on who is applying them and in what context, like what the agenda of the person applying them is, you may end up with cooperation and utopia, and you may end up with eugenics and like Hitler. Using Darwin's ideas as a metaphor. So I'm interested in figuring out with what can the social ledger do. Think of it as nitrogen in a wetland. Like initially, nitrogen is a very stable gas in the air, and it's not available for life forms. And something fixes the nitrogen. So there's a couple plants that are able to pull it out of the air, put it in them, and then you eat beans, or you till that cover crop into your soil or whatever, and you have more nitrogen available in some sort of ionic form or a molecule that is not N2, that is usable. So what is the social ledger doing to the information that we are making flow, right? As humans, we are having ideas, we are manifesting ideas into these non-living social objects. What do we need to, it's like isotope, tag them with so that we can see them when we need to, that we can actually make it useful in a context other than ours, so that somebody could come in from a completely different context and at least match up enough to help with a given document or object. In what way can we be literal and not be metaphorical in the ways that we're looking at information flows through the lens of the social ledger?
Right. Love that, Christina. And I want to come back to what you said earlier again about the conversation on the selfish gene. You said, genes taken out of context. That's exactly the same story that we talked earlier, right? So this is data taken out of context, right? And then they're grabbing it from all different places and think they have a picture of you, right? Same here. You take the genes and you think you have a picture of you. Well, obviously not. There's a little bit more to that, right? A little bit more to that story.
They're
And I love
saying that the gene or the person is the context. They're mistaking the person or the gene for the context.
exactly.
Like they're missing the whole background of the cell, and they think that it's just because the gene has parts and we can read those parts that's the.
Yes, I mean that's such a great expression of what the problem is here. And similar to what you said earlier about this is a reductionist approach. There's a researcher. Her name is Monica Anderson. If you look her up, she is an AI researcher, and she says the same thing essentially. What current AI research is doing is taking on a reductionist approach, to think that robots can, deduct from certain data points what you want, what you need, and what the meaning is so wrong, she says. And you need to have a different approach. She calls this a patterned AI, where you, instead of reduction, lose your reductionist thing, where you say here's formula A, B, C to give you that answer. You just look for higher level patterns in conversations or in the context you're in, and then match those somehow, and then that gets you to a better answer than going the other direction and looking at the grammar and structure and details and formulas that are way underneath that don't say anything because there's no context at that level.
Yeah, this is, I think what you're talking about is the old AI, where you programmed heuristics to
Yes,
solve
right,
the problem.
right.
Okay, everyone is moving away from that. Okay, the AI is better at pattern recognition than humans and does better without our stochastic shortcuts to discovering patterns and solutions to problems. And it's to some extent due to the power of modern computers to just try all the possibilities rather than being constrained in selecting the possibilities of organization.
Yeah, there's one more thing that Monica's talking about, Jim, which is called a model-free zone. And she actually criticizes today's AI models and ways we come up with these algorithms because they reduce things to a certain model. I mean, they need a kind of a model to run, right? Otherwise, how do you do anything? But she says this is again a reductionist approach to find the right model and then use that to generate your AGI or whatever you want to do with this. And then she talks about the model-free engagements, where you take that out, and you don't rely on something that's sort of predetermined, what happens next kind of thing, very deterministic. And that is really interesting what she's doing there. Okay, but I'm getting off track here. I just wanted to say one more thing about the comparison. So all in all, what I see, this is a good news story for us because we see now on which side we are on, so to say, right? Well, what the important pieces are and what the focus of the social ledger is a great way to move that project forward. So to have an alignment here to say, yes, this makes sense. These are the pieces that belong on the social ledger side. These are the pieces that belong on the, call it, selfish ledger side, right? We don't want to build this thing.
You can look at that through the lens of smart cities. And what would the civic ledger look like? What would the data flows, how would the data flows be changed if the smart cities were looked at through the lens of a civic ledger rather than a selfish ledger? Because the smart city is the manifestation of the selfish ledger. Like, yes, I see that video was creepy, but I can't believe people were surprised by it because the whole IoT is trying to do that, right? There's like sensor sand they want to put everywhere and
yes.
whatever. So what would the social ledger do for civics? Not just people collaborating within independent organizations, but actually on a municipal place-based level.
Yeah, that's a great example of how do you expand that thinking, right? On the same level, team, group, collective, and cities, right? They also have then they have a different context, right? And then again, it's about the relationships in the city. How does that system work, and how do you keep it alive and going, right? So it's the same thinking, just on a bigger scale, right? Which very much reflects, I think, what we want to do on the lower scale for the social ledger.
I think there's two. Okay, yes. Okay, at every level, we expose what we want to expose in order to feed our personal assistant or bot with the information about with intelligence about the things we do and where we are and whether we're overweight, whatever. We under our rules, okay. And people may share this stuff, all over the place. Okay, now within the whole lot of a team and an organization and a civic city, okay, we have UMA, user managed authorizations that control what we share within that and what we share on the outside of that. But there's also a virtual city. There's New York. okay, which consists of lots of ledgers that we may or may not have access to, depending on our web of trust. That give us greater information to use for our own benefit if we have self-sovereign tech stack and identity that with privacy by default. And I think that's the important thing we're building, and it's holonic. And what we're talking about, rather than the individual things, we're talking about the holons, whether or not they're discovered or they're actual. Okay, we may have a marketing team, but it's not defined. Okay, but the team is still there. Okay, if it's defined, we can control the information in terms of its exposure from in that team to outside that team, within the gig life and outside of gig life.
Yes, great. That's good final words. Let me add a few more. And thanks, Christina, for your thinking on that. To me, it almost comes down as a different mindset. You either on the traditional thinking, there's a high level hierarchical structure, and that's the way things work, or there's a sort of ecosystemic thinking, and you're part of a bigger thing. And to me, I see that in many places, including our collective, where people work on either this side and they ask for the rigid structure and vertical flows, and I see on the other side seeing the whole context, right, and say, hey, if we do this, we affect other pieces. Let's be careful about that. So to me, this comes down really to an interesting dichotomy of two different mindsets people operating in. So yeah, thank you, everyone. That was very cool. Very in-depth discussion. You have one more thing, Christina? Yeah.
Oh, one more thing. Yeah, I just for the recording, I gave the link for Mary Midgley's book, Science as Salvation: A Modern Myth and Its Meaning. And I think it would be super interesting for you to. It's a short book. It's not that thick. But I think you would really gain a lot from her thinking about information and metaphor and how we think about things, how we have to talk about things because of the way that language works in human beings. And she's an excellent and vocal critic of Richard Dawkins as well, although that book is not really a critique of Dawkins. I think she mentions him once or twice, but it really looks at the reductionist way of looking at things and how to look at information in a human, in context of humans. So you can add that
Great.
At the end.
Thank you. We'll add.
Looking at the holons.
And holons. That's right. Great. Thanks, Jim. Thanks, Gary. And it just gets to show how important the stuff is we're working on, right? So let's move on, Team Human, right? Until next time, right? Okay. Great talking. Cheers.
Bye.
Bye-bye.